Hey, welcome everyone. Thomas here. I'm happy to see you that you joined this stream wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you currently are. I'm super happy that you joined this live stream of the global Azure Virtual event, which hosts a lot of different sessions around the world, different streams, different YouTube videos, a lot of recordings. I also have seen amazing plans for workshops and local events, all doing these using remote technologies like Teams and Skype and so on. So super happy you're joining me. In this session, we're going to talk about how you can connect your servers to the cloud using Azure Hybrid Management technologies and how you actually can manage your servers. Doesn't matter where they're running. In a hybrid manner. So you can use the same basically management technologies you're going to use for Azure, also for your servers running on-prem or at other cloud providers. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Thomas Maurer. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and I'm part of the Azure engineering team. And what we are doing basically is that one part of our job is to create and deliver content, like for example at Ignite the Tour, but also a lot of different online content as well. And then the other part we're doing is like listening to feedback. We want to know from our customers like what is working, what is not working, and then take that feedback and bring it back to the engineering teams. And so that's a great opportunity, I think, as well. Since this is not a recorded session right now, I'm basically live, you have the opportunity to also use the live chat. However, that said, it's still a presentation. I will see how I can handle the live chat at the same time. But again, if you have asked or questions, you can also always ask me on Twitter or on my blog as well. So let's just jump into this session and talk actually about the hybrid management strategies we are having. And you're going to love this. We're going to use everyone's new favorite company called Tailwind Traders. And if you haven't heard about Tailwind Traders yet, it's a good point to learn about it. I'm sure many of you have heard about Contoso in the past. Now, Tailwind Traders is basically a more forward-thinking company than Contoso maybe was. And now we are using this company as a demo company, representing everyone and no one at the same time. So we can take some examples and go in and how we're actually going to use it. So Tailwind Traders really has a couple of challenges, and they are an organically growing company, right? They have a past. They're not just a startup which just started in the cloud. They really have systems on-prem. They have their branch office and so on. And I will talk a little bit about their challenges in a bit. But again, they're organically grown, and they're looking into technologies, how they can actually take advantage using Azure and get some of these technologies to make their on-prem environment even better, right? So let's have a look how that works. And before we actually go into these details, and I'm going to show you a couple of demos as well, I want to quickly go out and see, hey, what are actually the challenges of Tailwind Traders? Why are you doing this? Why would they look at the cloud and like say, hey, can the cloud actually help us? So one of their larger challenges is that they are managing hundreds or thousands of apps, right? And some of these apps they're running are very modern apps. Those are like apps on PaaS services, serverless apps, containerized apps, even some no-code apps, right? And low-code apps, if you will. However, they're obviously also running a couple of servers, and these can be virtual machines. These can be even physical servers. And guess what? Those applications running on these servers, they're not just going away, right? They're going to stick with this company for a while, because rewriting them all the time and modernizing them is a good thing to do, but it also costs a lot of money and time. And so they are stuck with a lot of different apps and types of apps which they are actually managing. The other part Tailwind Traders operations team needs to deal with is like their diverse hardware set, right? So if you look at the different places where they run services, they have their own data centers, they have branch offices, they have stores, they have factories. Some services they outsource to a hoster. They even use some IoT devices and so on. And all that needs to be managed by the Tailwind Traders operation team. Now, and the last thing I want to mention here in the complexity they are getting in their environment is about multi-cloud, right? Even though they decided that Azure is their main cloud provider, and that was actually a very smart move, they already had other cloud providers in there, right? Some departments started with other cloud providers there. Maybe some directions were even a strategy to use multiple cloud providers, or they decided that, okay, this service is maybe better than not cloud, right? So many fair points why they would probably have more than just one cloud provider. But again, what we see here is a lot of complexity going on, where we have like these modern environments, but then we also have our classic legacy and traditional environments, if you will. And again, they're not going away. And we are also living in a hybrid world where they not just move everything to the cloud, right? They don't want to depend on some internet connectivity. And so the Tailwind Traders Management was actually very lucky. They went to Ignite last year in Orlando, and they saw the keynotes of Satya, and after that, you can see here Jason Sanders, which were talking about hybrid, right? And hybrid was really a big topic, and then he was with Jason Sanders, basically the engineering lead of Azure, directly under Scott Guthrie, talking about hybrid and why hybrid is so important, and basically saying, hey, we think that hybrid is an end state for our customers, and it's not just an in-between state before everything is migrated to cloud, right? So there's definitely a need there to run some services, maybe in your branch offices, in your factories, at the edge, and so on. And so we have a large set of solutions there, which we actually can use, right? So we have our management tools, which we have there for a long time, because Azure was really built from the ground up to be hybrid, right? If you think about Azure Active Directory, if you think about our security services, like with Azure Security Center and Sentinel, Azure Monitor, Azure Site Recovery for disaster recovery, many of these tools which we already have for a long time, which allows you basically to connect your services up to Azure and take advantage of the cloud, but still keep some services on-prem. Now, we also have like solutions like our IoT solutions, which help our customers basically at the edge to deploy different devices, whatever they actually need. And we also have our large Azure Stack portfolio. And I say portfolio because we recently switched from like Azure Stack just being a single product or service or solution to basically have a family of products there. So we have, for example, Azure Stack Edge, Azure Stack Hub, and Azure Stack HCI, which are all very great solutions if you need to run something in your data center. And depending on what you need, you can do that using our Azure Stack solutions. And then the large announcement we had was basically Azure Arc. And I will talk about in Azure Arc a little bit at the end of this session and see how you can actually leverage Azure Arc for your server systems running wherever they are. So Tailwind Traders decided to implement Azure Hybrid technologies to better manage and extend their on-premises environment with Azure Cloud Service. So when they saw this and they realized, hey, Microsoft really believes that hybrid is the case and that matches with what we need. So let's go and see what we can actually leverage to make our on-prem environment better. Now, to show you this, instead of just showing you all of our solutions and we have and what we can do, we want to trick some like real world scenarios where we can see, hey, how can we actually solve some of the challenges Tailwind Traders has? And so we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges Tailwind Traders has, especially when it comes to server management, right? So the first one we're going to talk about is disaster recovery. They want to simplify their solution. They want to be protected in a way that they can, like, if something happens to their factories or their offices or their data centers, that they actually can basically fail over to another location. They have things in place today, but they're not really happy about the costs, but also about the complexity they are having with this. And one of the challenges they're having, and I think everyone who runs server out there at one point in time faces that challenge. Some of them then probably solve it by investing a lot of time and effort into automating that process. But again, when it comes to updating and like deploying software updates to servers, this gets really complex and can be very, very difficult to achieve. And we're going to talk a little bit about this later on. I think in a hybrid world, this becomes even more important and even more complex to solve, right? So we're going to talk about how they can do that, address this. And then they run file servers, like most of the companies out there. You probably have used a file server as a user or even as an admin. So we have files, the Tailwind Traders has file servers out there. And what they want to do are simple things like having all the files on like all their office locations, right? They want to have them synchronized between these locations. They want to make sure that they're available at all time. They also want to like save a little bit of storage costs, because like this takes a lot of, they don't want to buy new servers and more storage all the time. So they want to take advantage of the cloud a little bit in that sense. And then the last one is really about like how can they actually manage and govern their servers. So we have great tools in Azure where we can actually manage all the Azure resources and make sure that they're compliant with a certain set of policies we're having. But wouldn't it be great to also use them for our servers in a hybrid environment? And so those are the challenges Tailwind Traders is facing. This is what I'm going to talk about in this session. Again, there's much, much more in our hybrid story, but we're going to focus on this one, especially because it shows like what we actually can do. So for most of our demos, and I'm going to show you a lot of demos in this next couple of minutes here on this live stream, I'm going to use a couple of different products. I'm going to use Windows Server 2019, but maybe also older versions of Windows Server as well. We're going to use Azure Stack HCI as our infrastructure, but again, there's no need for that, but we can use that as well. And then I'm going to use Windows Admin Center. And Windows Admin Center, if you don't know what it is, it's basically a web-based solution to basically manage your server environments, right? And it's not something running in the cloud. It's really like something you can download, install on-prem to manage your servers. And you don't need to install it on every server out there. You can just install it on a single server. You can even install it on your Windows 10 machine, and then using remote management capabilities to manage your servers from one specific machine. And in the background, it uses PowerShell remoting to basically do that. And this is great. Windows Admin Center is really a fantastic tool. It's a very modern tool. It also brings new features like the new performance monitor and things like that. And again, it's free. Like if you are on Windows Server, you basically just can download it and install it. And it brings like modern management tools for things like device manager, certificates management, and all of that. So you can basically use it to manage all your servers on-prem. Even if they run in the cloud, you can also leverage Windows Admin Center for that. And again, there's no need to connect it to the cloud. However, one thing Windows Admin Center does also really well is helping us to onboard Azure cloud services, right? So it makes it very simple for us. Okay, let's say we want to add backup to one of our servers. Windows Admin Center can help us with that. That said, you can also use all the services I'm going to show you with Windows Admin Center. You can also use them without Windows Admin Center, right? So if you don't want to use it in your environment for every reason, you can still onboard your services using installers and scripts and stuff like that. So let's jump right into the first challenge. And I see we have Kyle here on the live stream just with a comment. Thank you very much for reading my blog. Happy you joined the live stream. I hope I can show you some new stuff as well. Thank you, Kyle. Again, one of the first challenges I talked about, which Tailwind Traders is facing, really is disaster recovery, right? And I mentioned already a couple of the challenges they are facing with disaster recovery, but they also have some additional ones. So for example, think about the distance requirements, right? Sometimes you need to have a certain set of distance. Sometimes the distance is too far away. In some cases, the distance is not far away enough to actually have a disaster recovery solution in place, right? So they have their buildings and their stores, which they can leverage. But in some cases, they're too close or too far away. So in that case, also doesn't work anymore. They have to think about things like initial replication. So if they have very thin bandwidth, if you will, very light bandwidth in their connections, so how do we actually get that data for the initial replication from one place to the other? But most importantly, I think there are two others which are big challenges for Tailwind traders. One of them is about cost. So they're paying a lot of money to certain vendors to basically have these disaster recovery solutions in place. But the other one is really complexity as well, right? So it can be very complex. So they're thinking, okay, look, we have this data center here, data center 1. So replicate VMs from data center 1 to data center 2. And then we have data center 3. What are we doing with that? And so they have to think about these solutions. And when it then comes to branch offices, it gets even more complex. So, right? So they want to simplify that as well and make their lives easier. So we're going to have a look at the quick demo, how Tailwind traders solve their challenges with their current disaster recovery strategy using Azure Site Recovery. And Azure Site Recovery really helps us in a certain set of ways. And I will show you that a part of that in the demo. And Azure Site Recovery really, what I want to show you is that how Tailwind traders can replicate VMs or even physical servers to Azure using Azure Site Recovery, and when they need it, basically just fail them over to Azure and run them in Azure, and when they want to fail back, they can also fail back. So let's have a look at that, and let's have a look at Azure Site Recovery here. So here I am in Windows Admin Center. Again, this is a web-based solution. You can see here, this is locally installed on my machine, right? This is not something which is running in the cloud at all. This is just installed here on my machine. I then connected to my Hyper-V server. You can see here to my Hyper-V server 01. So I do remote management. And you can see here on the left side, you have the menu, which basically is like different, as we call it, extensions. So for example, you have one for certificate management, one for device management, files, firewall, and so on, which you can manage your server. In the middle, you get like some information right now. I'm on the overview page, so you can see here which version I'm running, how much memory the server has, and so on. Now, what I want to do now is really like protect my VMs running on that Hyper-V server. So what I'm going to do, I dive in and scroll down, and we have a virtual machine solution here. So you can see here, if I go to virtual machines, I have a summary here with some information, how much VMs do I have, and then if I go to inventory, you can see here I'm running 4 virtual machines. And what I want to do here is, for example, I want to replicate app02, my virtual machine, and to do that, I'm just going and say, hey, protect VM. So then the wizard comes up, it says, okay, to which Azure subscription you want to replicate. I already did set that up. You can see here, the only thing I need to choose now is the storage account for that machine, and then I would click on Protect VM, and it would start doing the initial replication of that virtual machine. Now, we don't, obviously, since we're doing a demo here, we don't want to wait and replicate the VM here. I already did that, and you can see here with app01, if I click on Protected here, it will bring me to the Azure portal. So this VM is already configured, this is already replicated. I already have done my initial replication. You can see that here. So I have app02, it says healthy, it says protected, meaning that it always constantly replicates changes basically to Azure, right? So if I click on it, I get some more information here. You can see here again, I have some health information here. It says healthy, it says protected, and you see also like that the last change was really 5 seconds ago. There are a couple of things though I need to configure. You can see here, Azure Site Recovery is very smart. It takes the name of the VM and would take that for the Azure VM. The thing I would need to configure is the resource group. It's also very smart and detects the size of that VM and matches it with the Azure size. And then I would also need to configure the virtual network, which I'm joining that VM to as soon as I boot it up. However, I'm not going to do that for time reasons right now. But I want to really have a look at the failover options you can see here. And I want to start with test failover, right? So test failover, if you set everything up and you have your virtual machine replicating and everything, that's fine. So you can tell your manager, hey, the VM is replicating to Azure and I could do a failover when we need. Now, does it really work? Does this application still work? I would rather find out before actually a disaster happens if it really works, right? So that's why we have test failover. Now, if you create a test failover, what happens is It creates the virtual machine in Azure, but in an isolated network, completely separated from the production environment, right? So it still replicates the changes, everything is running, your production workloads are not impacted at all. But you have now that test VM or even multiple VMs in that virtual network, and you can test if they're running. Oh, they're working, the application is working. Oh, I did not think of that dependency, for example. So you find it out and you can basically fix that. And no, next time you do a failover, you need to do this and change that, or you fix this. But actually you can basically do disaster recovery drills using the test failover. The other thing I want to talk about is failover itself. Obviously, that is the button you would click if you want to fail over that virtual machine to Azure. Now, so let's say the Hyper-V server fails, or your data center fails, or branch office, and you want to now start that VM up in Azure. In that case, you just go into the Azure portal, you press failover, and you will basically see the last recovery points which are stored, and then you can select either the latest one or even like further back, right? Depending on what you think is the best one. And then it starts up that VM in there. So then this would mean that, like, for example, it replicates, let's say, every 2 minutes or something like that, or every 30 seconds, depending on your configuration, or even longer periods of time, you would kind of like lose the last thing, like the data from the last recovery point, right? And if I know I have, for example, to do data center maintenance tomorrow, I know I don't want to lose anything, right? But I want to probably fail over already my virtual machines to Azure and basically run everything in Azure, do my data center maintenance, and when I'm done, basically fail back, right? And so I don't have interruptions for my users, and that's where planned failover comes into the game. So when I do a planned failover, what happens is it shuts down the virtual machines. It replicates the latest changes to Azure, so you don't have any data loss, and then starts up the VMs. This is, by the way, also a great way of migrating VMs to Azure if you wanted to. And so Azure Site Recovery, the great thing about it, it can do much, much more than I just showed you. It also gives you, pricing-wise, an option that you don't pay basically the VMs while they're just replicating, right? You don't pay the Azure VM, you pay the storage and you pay a fee for Azure Site Recovery. And you only start paying after 31 days, right? So the first 31 days are free. So that's also a great option when you actually do migrations. Okay, so this was Azure Site Recovery and a very simple scenario. And what I just showed you is basically you have your Hyper-V server here and you have some virtual machines running on that, and then you replicate it to Azure, and in case you can do planned failover, and test failover whenever you need it. However, that also works obviously with Hyper-V clusters, Azure Stack HCI clusters. This also works with VMware and physical machines as well, right? So whatever you want to protect, you can actually go up and replicate that to Azure. Now, it's not just about the replication. I have to mention that. And again, you can say, hey, Thomas, okay, doing one VM, that's fine, but I probably have hundreds of VMs. I don't want to click on hundreds of VMs and replicate that. So Azure Site Recovery also has a orchestration built in, right? So it detects, like if you run a couple of clusters like VMware or Hyper-V, detects that VMs, and you can basically just like select all to replicate to Azure, or even do site to site. So you can also just use the orchestration, right? If you say, okay, I have 2 data centers, I just want to leverage that, let's just let Azure Site Recovery do the orchestration of that. And then you can build something called failover or recovery plans. So in a recovery plan, you can then group your VMs, like kind of like step by step. So you can say, hey, I want to, for example, my domain controllers to fail over first. After that, I want to fail over my database servers, and when they are failed over, I want to fail over my application servers. You can even add manual steps or even Azure automation runbooks, so you can even automate the whole task. And in the best case, you just say, click on the failover plan and say failover, and it will do all the tasks for you, right? So you can completely orchestrate your data center failover, not just to Azure, but also between your own data centers if you want to. So that's Azure Site Recovery. The next challenge I want to talk about, and again, I saw that Andrew just arrived in the live chat. Oh, that was great. We met at Ignite in London. So that's awesome. Thank you for joining our live stream here. So going back here, what I talked before was another challenge Tailwind Trader has, and that's when it comes to update management. And I'm sure whenever you worked as an IT admin, IT engineer, IT operations person, you know that keeping servers up to date and managing updates can be very challenging and a lot of work. And so I've seen a lot of companies putting a lot of effort in building automation around this. And again, it gets more and more complex, especially if you're in a hybrid environment. Now, so what we want to do, and what Tailwind Traders really is challenging for them, is they have physical machines, they have virtual machines, they run on-prem, they run in the cloud. Those are Linux machines and Windows machines. So they basically have all the set. And like right now, that's really challenging. So they need to be aware that they're actually complying with the update policy, right? They need to be sure that they actually have the updates installed on their machines and they're actually like complying with their internal update policy. And what they also realized is it's very challenging for them to do that for all these environments. So they have a solution in Azure, they have a different solution on-prem, and they probably have different solutions for the systems running at a service provider or another cloud provider. And so they have this huge mix of different tools, which makes it very hard for them, and they need to put a lot of effort in to manage all of that. So the question really is, how does Tailwind Traders ensure that both servers running in the cloud as well as on-prem have the most recent software updates applied? And if not, how do they apply these? So I'm going to show you a quick demo of a solution called Azure Update Management. And as you think of, if you run virtual machines in Azure, you probably already have seen that, because you can use Azure Update Management to patch your machines in Azure. Now, the kicker here is, what a lot of people don't know is that you can also use Azure Update Management to patch your systems outside of Azure. So here, I'm back in the Azure portal. I'm in a automation account, basically in the Update Management solution. And what you can see here, I already onboarded one of my Azure VMs, so that's called Azure VM 01. And it says, okay, that VM is compliant, it runs in Azure, and it's a Windows operating system, right? So that's all great. Now, what I can do, I can now go and basically add more Azure VMs if I wanted to, or add non-Azure VMs. So that will bring me to the documentation and tell me how to onboard this. Now, since I have Windows Admin Center, I can use Windows Admin Center to onboard these servers. So I go down, I go to Updates, and here I would usually just manage the updates for that local server, right? I would go out and say, hey, install these patches, that's fine. But now, since I want to use a centralized solution, I click on Update Now. So this will then basically let me connect this server here to Azure Update Management. So what I'm going to select here, obviously, after I logged in, my subscription where I have my Update Management solution. I'm going to select the right resource group where I deployed it. It automatically detects the region where I have this solution, and then I go out and say, hey, okay, connect me to that specific log analytics workspace and use that specific Azure automation account. That's the automation account I just showed you in the Azure portal. Then I click on Setup, and this will basically do everything for me. So this will download the agent, will install the agent, and then basically connect the agent to our Update Management solution. So again, this will take a while to complete. And if I go back to the Azure portal, you will see that my local server called VAC now shows up in the Azure portal, and it says, hey, platform, this is a non-Azure VM, right? This runs outside of Azure and it's not compliant. So let's fix that. So let's schedule a new update deployment, and let's give it a name. In my case, I just call it on-prem because I'm going to patch my on-prem system, but you can choose whatever you want. I'm going to select Windows, and then I can select the machines. And usually what I would do in a production environment, I would basically select the group. You can do dynamic groups based on tags and so on. But now to make it easier, I'm just going to select a single VM here. So I'm going to select my on-prem VM and say, okay, that's the VM I want to patch. Obviously, you can add as many as you want, almost. So you can also select the update classifications. You can include or exclude specific updates. And then you can schedule it. So when should basically the updates be installed? I'm going to select the date, I'm going to select the time, and I can also make it a recurring task. So if I want to say, hey, every week, every Tuesday, or every Tuesday and every Thursday, or even monthly, I can basically go out and patch. I can run pre and post scripts and then configure if it should reboot, if it needs a reboot. Usually a good thing to do. So now I have scheduled that update process. And with the help of a little bit of video editing, I can actually show you how that actually works now. So you can see we would need to wait until that comes. So I go to like deployment schedules. So you see here that this update deployment is now scheduled, and that we will actually patch that VM. When that happened in the history, you can now see that this job basically succeeded. You can see here also it took 10 minutes to complete. And then we can see some more information. Again, we patched one machine here with 3 updates on that system. So that's great. And again, if I go to my machine overview, you can now see here all of my machines running in Azure and running outside of Azure are now compliant with my update policy, right? So this is really great, I think. And again, people will say, okay, we have 2 machines, that's probably not that spectacular. But if you onboard a couple of VMs, if you have hundreds of servers here, again, this can be physical and virtual machines running outside or inside of Azure, which you can manage basically from a single solution. So that was Azure Update Management. And again, Azure Update Management really helps us to address the following things. First of all, it checks for update compliance. So we can make sure that our Windows and Linux systems running on-prem or in Azure or at other cloud provider are basically compliant with the updates we want to install. And then you can also go out and deploy these updates, right? If you don't want, like if you see you're not compliant with it, you can basically go out and schedule update deployment, or you can make it a recurring task. So you can always say, hey, every second Thursday, for example, you want to patch this group of VMs. Every third Wednesday of the month, you probably go out and patch this group of VMs or servers. Again, if I say VMs, in that means right now servers, so you can also patch physical boxes as well. And again, this really helps us avoiding like having different solutions for different platforms, right? That's where we want to go. We don't want to use just because something runs somewhere else. I mean, it's still a Windows server, it's still a Linux server. We want to use this one single tool to basically patch all these systems, and exactly Azure Update Management helps us to address this. So how does that work in the background? Again, as I said, it supports Windows and Linux machines running in Azure at other clouds and on-prem. And then it goes out basically and assesses these operating systems, and then goes out and deploys these updates if I wanted to. Again, I can also just use it to basically deploy it. And then it goes out and verifies if I'm now patched. That said, it's not a replacement for like WSUS, right? If you have a source, like take WSUS as a source because you want to save bandwidth and things like that, you can still use that. You can just use Azure Update Management to just orchestrate the update process, and it will download the updates from WSUS. And if you're on Linux machines, for example, you can take advantage of like public repositories or private repositories. Doesn't really matter. It's really just to be like the orchestrator for installing these updates and checking for compliance and things like that. So what I also need to mention is if you're running Azure Stack Hub, for example, if you have an Azure Stack Hub and you have your own portal and you run virtual machines on that, there is an extension for your VMs running there. So if you deploy a VM on Azure Stack Hub, you can say, hey, automatically join me to this update management solution or that Azure Log Analytics workspace, and then it will connect and will automatically set that up. And the funny thing here is that it then will show up as an Azure VM, because VMs you deploy on Azure Stack Hub are treated as Azure VMs, basically. So if you have an Azure Stack Hub, you can basically directly integrate into that as well. So let's talk about the next challenge. And I think, again, if you're in IT operations and you have been in IT operations for the last couple of years, I'm sure you have dealt with file servers. So Tailwind Traders has a couple of file servers, and the question really is, how does Tailwind Traders make sure that their file servers are replicated, have enough capacity, and are prepared for backup and disaster recovery, right? But those are really the main challenges that probably we have with every file server solution. And you can think of, if you want to replicate file servers today, like some board solution, like built-in solution will probably be DFSR. And usually what I would ask is like, who likes DFSR? And basically no one tells me that they like DFSR, right? DFSR is great, don't get me wrong. Like for example, we use it for Active Directory and stuff like that. But doing it for file server is kind of like a little bit challenging. So let's have a look what we actually can do here and how we can leverage Azure to make things better. Before I show you the demo, I want to give you a quick overview what you're going to see in the demo and how the environment is set up. So we have Tailwind Traders. They have different file servers in different cities and at different offices. And they are already connected, one of their file servers, to Azure File Sync. So here we have the file server 1, which is in New York. You can see here users and applications are using that file server for their data, right? So they're going out as you would do with a normal file server. As I said, they already set up the file server to be connected to Azure File Sync. And that means we have an Azure file share in Azure where data gets replicated to. And without doing anything else, they can already now take advantage of something called cloud tiering. Now, as you know, users usually don't go out and basically just delete and remove old files, right? No one really cleans up, and just everyone keeps their files that can be 10 years old, 5 years old, and no one really touches them. And I'm not sure if you want to waste that storage space on that file server 1 for these files, because no one touches them in the next couple of years, maybe again, but you still need to keep them. So with cloud tiering, you can say, hey, I want to have all my files, which are, for example, older than a year or 30 days or 60 days or whatever it is, I want to have them just moved out to the cloud. You can still see them on the file server, they're still there, but basically they don't take any storage space, right? So if a user then needs a file which is 10 years old, they click on it and it will, in the background, download it from the cloud. So it will take a little bit of longer until the file opens, but again, it doesn't take any space. And again, you get that basically immediately when you use Azure File Sync. Now, since we are now replicating or have replicated all these files to an Azure file share, we now get cloud access. And I will talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes. But now basically we can access that Azure file share and we can access these files. And then with Azure File Sync, I can now add multiple servers. So we can add file server 2 and based in Seattle, and it will automatically sync all the files. And if I do changes on one file from one office, it will replicate to the other one, right? So I get that multi-site sync, and I will show you that in a bit. The other thing we can take advantage of is, for example, Azure Backup. Now, instead of setting up now backup in the New York office or in the Seattle office, we already have the files in Azure, and we need to do long-term backups anyway. So why not just don't use that tape backup at all anymore? Just turn it off and use Azure Backup, because Azure Backup can give us a retention rate for 99 years if we wanted to. So we can just back up all these files on a file share in Azure for that, right? So we can take advantage of that. And the last thing I want to show you, which is very impressive, is when it comes to disaster recovery. So what would you do if file server 2 in Seattle now would crash? Now, what you usually would do is probably tell people, hey, unfortunately, you can't work with these files anymore. Come home, go home, and come tomorrow again until we have restored all the files from our backups. That will take a while. Now, with Azure File Sync, what we can do is we can just quickly spin up a new server. Let's call it File Server 3. Install the Azure File Sync agent, and this will then download all the metadata, all the files basically get visible on that file server in a couple of minutes, depending on how many files and how large they are and so on. However, it will not download the files, right? They are still stored in the cloud, but now the user can see them again. And if they need it, it will in the background download it, as we saw with cloud tiering. So let me show you how that actually works. So here's a quick demo about Azure File Sync. This is File Server 1. So remember, the green server, File Server 1, the file server in New York. And you can see here we have a couple of files and folders here, like Tailwind Traders Engineering, Marketing, Sales, and obviously also our super important files. So we have a couple of PowerPoints and PDFs here in our super important file folder. Now, what I already showed you is we already installed Azure File Sync, so this file is already syncing up. And now I'm here in the storage sync service where I have a sync group. And that's where basically everything which syncs with the same folders is coming together. So let's open up that sync group. And you can see here now I have two endpoints. One is the cloud endpoint and the other one is a server endpoint. The server endpoint is like our file server 01. And you can see here the local file share. And then we also have the cloud endpoint. This is an Azure file share. Now, this Azure file share, as I said, lives in Azure, and it's a normal Azure file share in a storage account. And if we go and have a look at that storage account, and specifically at that Azure file share, you can see here we have the same folders and files showing up on that Azure file share as we have on file server 1 running in our New York office. Now, to actually show you that this actually works, what we can do here is we can go back to our file server 1 and create a new folder. So I'm usually a very creative person. So let's call that folder 1. Okay, and then we have that folder here. And if we now go back to the Azure portal and have a look at that Azure file share, you can see here now folder 1 showing up, right? So again, this obviously not just works with folders, it also works with files, but basically they are now constantly replicating. Now what we want to do here is add file server 2, basically in Seattle to it. So we're going to switch now to file server 2. This is the blue server, right? And you can see here I have a local file share, but no files at all right now, right? I have an empty file share, but I want to have the same files as I have in New York and basically give my user access to them so they can start working with them. So what I need to do here is I need to go out and add another server endpoint. Again, you can see here I only have file server 2, and I will use Windows Admin Center for that. So just to make sure, let me go quickly show you here again my sync group. You can see here file server 1 is already in there. So I'm going to file server 2 and now create remote connection. I can start managing that server. And you can see here on the left side, we have an extension called Azure File Sync in Windows Admin Center. So I click on this, and again, it will show me a video basically, which tells exactly the same story, which I'm just telling you. So I'm going to click on Setup. I need to log in basically and install the Azure agent, the Azure File Sync agent. I'm going to click on Deploy that agent. I configured that Windows Update. Basically, does also update that agent because you get some new features and fixes for that agent like constantly with that. So it downloads the agent, installs the agent on that specific server. And what we need to do right now is we need now to connect with our storage sync group. So for that, I'm going to log in with my Azure account. I can then select the Azure subscription where my sync group is. I'm going to select the right resource group. And then you can see here the storage sync service, which I just mentioned and showed you in Azure before, shows up. So I can click Next, can register a server. And now this Windows Admin Center takes care of all of that. If you run a new version of Windows Admin Center, you can basically now start configuring everything else as well in Windows Admin Center. But for us, I want to show you the next steps basically in the Azure portal. So again, I'm back in the Azure portal. I go to my sync group, and you can see here my endpoint. So I'm going to add another file server here as a file server endpoint called file server 02. Give it the local path. And here I can now configure cloud tiering. So I can go out and the cloud tiering, as I mentioned, I can say, hey, always keep 20% of the volume free. So, and then I also want that only files are stored or cached on that server which are younger than 60 days, right? So everything older gets basically offloaded and just exists in the cloud. So I'm going to add that server. This will go out and now configure it and provisioning it and replicate already the files in the background. If I now go to file server 2, voila, you can see here all my folders I just showed you before. All my files are now available in file server 2 in the Seattle office, and I can also go out and create another folder. Let's call that folder 2. Again, very creative as I am. And if I go to the Azure portal and I go to the storage account, I can do a refresh in the UI here, and you can see here folder 2 shows up on the Azure file share. And if I now go back to file server 1, I can see here, if I do a refresh in Explorer, you can see here folder 2 is now also available in the New York office as well. And again, this is obviously just also works with files and not just folders, but that's an easy way of showing it to do that. So this is Azure File Sync. And again, it's very great to use that to have basically your file servers in the local offices become basically your caching servers. So all your files are on Azure File Share, and then you have these caching servers, so you don't really rely on the internet connectivity. You have better speed, less latency, and so on. However, we have customers telling us, hey, why do I even want that file server, right? I have people working from home, I have people working from everywhere. I don't want to run that file server. I don't want to have that in place at all. And a couple of months back, we basically announced a preview of Active Directory authentication support on Azure Files. So now what you can do is you can just have an Azure file share and basically just mount that to your user's machine. Doesn't matter where they're located, and they basically can access it as it would be a local server. Same, it takes over the permissions of your file server, of the files, and so on. So you can basically have like a serverless file share where you can do all the file share. So this is great, and you can obviously also combine that using Azure File Sync as well for some offices, and then some users basically from remote are using just the Azure File share as well. So I think this is a very, very good solution for that. I also need to mention this is great again for Azure File, for like bringing your file servers if you need that to the cloud. However, if you're looking for a new solution, it's probably also good to invest into Office, to have a look at Office 365 and SharePoint and see how, and OneDrive, and how you can work with that as well, right? So we just learned about how we can actually manage or improve our file servers using the cloud, right? So the next thing I want to talk about is how does Tailwind Traders make sure that servers across Azure on premises and other cloud providers are compliant and configured and managed in a single control plane. So this is one of the very challenging things we have out there. And I mentioned this already for update management and a lot of other things going on. But there's more, right? It's not just about updates, it's also about security settings, server settings, and I want to make sure that I see that. It's also about having an inventory, right? I want to make sure that everything has, I can see, hey, what servers do I actually have? Which team do they belong to? Which cost center do they belong to? And all of that, right? And we kind of solve that in Azure with our Azure Management tools. You can use our Azure Resource Manager basically to use tags and subscription management, resource groups, and all of that to organize your resources. And then you can use Azure policies to basically manage your Azure environment, and Azure guest configuration policies to manage your server operating systems within Azure. Now, but again, Tailwind Traders does not just have Azure servers in Azure, they also run servers on-prem in their own environment, in their own data centers. So how can they combine it? And for that, we're going to have a look at Azure Arc and how it looks as a cloud operator. And I also see that Bruno Silva joined us in the live stream from Brazil. Hi Bruno, thank you for joining. So I'm going to show you a quick demo of how that could look like if you're a cloud operator and you need to have that overview about all your servers running in Azure, but also outside of Azure. So here I'm in the Azure portal. And you can see here I'm under all resources, and I see all my Azure resources. So I can see here my Azure VMs, my network adapters, my web apps, my databases, my automation account, and so on. Now, wouldn't it be great to also see the non-Azure systems? And I'm going to show you that in this demo. So again, I just want to see, for example, now all my Azure VMs as well as my other servers running here. So I'm going to use here and select just Azure Virtual Machines and Azure Arc machines. And now I can see my Azure VMs right next to my on-prem systems, like File Server 01, File Server 02. You can also use tags and tag them basically on their location if I wanted to. So some of them are in the different data centers, some of them are obviously hosted in Azure. I can also use grouping, for example, so make it a little bit more clear. So I group by type, so I can see here my Azure Arc machines and again my Azure VMs, but I can see them side by side in the Azure portal. Now, you already saw using tags. I can now also use tags to basically say, hey, I want to see all my servers from cost center 1001. And you can see here, I have one on-prem server and one server running in Azure, which belong to the same cost center. So super easy to basically organize my servers in Azure. Now, again, this is cool, but there is much, much more. So what I want to show you is Azure Policy. Again, Azure Policy helps you to configure your Azure environment, and then Azure Guest Configuration Policy helps you to manage your VMs running in Azure to configure the operating systems and audit the operating systems. Now, with Azure Arc, we can extend this. So let me show you how that actually looks like. So if I go to assignments, I can basically go out and assign a new initiative, which is a set of policies. And then I would select the scope, which could be a management group, a subscription, or even down to a resource group. Again, depending on where I want to set these policies. And then I can select initiative. And now you can see here I have a couple of initiatives already built into Azure, but let's have a look at like passwords. So I want to have a policy which audits my VMs for insecure password settings. And again, I should say probably not just VMs, like my servers, right? So I want to audit them. And I already created that policy. That's why I'm just going out here to show you that. So you can see here all the assignments. And if you're not familiar with Azure policies, on the overview page, you get some overview about what is going on, how is my compliance state. If you want to see more about compliance, I can basically go here into compliance. And I can see here like all the assignments I'm compliant and not compliant. And here's one I'm not compliant, so I'm going to have a look at what's actually here. And in this case, I'm auditing Windows VMs that are not set to a specific time zone. Now, again, this is interesting. I want to have all my VMs or all my servers set to a specific time zone. So if I go to non-compliant resources, now what I can see here, I can not just see my Azure resources, I can also see my hybrid resources I joined from my on-prem environment or from other cloud providers. And I can see here all my servers which are not compliant and not set to that specific time zone. So this is a fantastic way, and again, I can use that for different other policies. And again, it works for all servers running outside of Azure. It can be physical, it can be virtual, it can be Windows, it can be Linux. I'm going to show you a little bit more about that in a bit. So that was actually the overview about how a cloud operator now gets an overview about what is running in their environment. The other thing before we go on, I want to show you quickly a high-level overview about Azure Management, right? So this is a very high-level overview how Azure Management works. And let's start from the left side here. So on the left side, you can see here, us as an Azure customers using Azure, we basically interact with the portal, PowerShell, the CLI, the APIs, or we use tools which are communicating with the APIs. And if we are doing that, we are basically interacting with Azure Resource Manager. And Azure Resource Manager is really like what is doing all of these magic, right, behind the scenes. Like there you get all the role-based access controls, logs, subscription management, policies, tags, the grouping, and all that technology. You get that from Azure Resource Manager. And again, much more than just this. As I said, you can also use templates and extensions and all of that. We could use Azure Resource Manager until the announcement of Azure Arc. We were basically using that for Azure resources. So that means Azure VMs, web apps, Service Fabric, Kubernetes clusters, and all of basically the Azure services which we have there. And again, people were so happy. It really helped us to organize our resources. Now, why not use them again and extend this? So what we're actually doing with Azure Arc is extending the Azure Resource Manager. So we can connect services, servers, and other things which live outside of Azure, right? So we announced at Ignite 2019, we announced Azure Arc, which now supports servers, Linux and Windows servers in public preview to connect them up to Azure Arc and then basically connect them to Azure Resource Manager. And then we have private previews currently for Kubernetes clusters. Again, this can be Kubernetes clusters running on-prem in one of your factories or at the edge or at another cloud provider, which you can also then connect to Azure Arc. You can then use the same management technologies to make sure like you configure it the right way with the right policies so everything is secure. Or you can even go and deploy apps on containerized apps on this. And then the last one I want to talk about is like just a little bit is like Azure Data Services. So we had a lot of, we can actually connect like Azure Data Services, which we can then run on-prem or at other cloud providers as well. So this allows you basically to run Azure SQL or Azure Postgres wherever you want it, and basically connect it up using Azure Arc and start running them, managing them using Azure Resource Manager. Again, this is not just a replacement for like local management tools. You can then still use your local management tools like Windows Admin Center, PowerShell, your Kubernetes tools, Data Studio to manage that on-prem, right? But again, you get that overall view, you get the benefit of the Azure Resource Manager with all of that. So again, Azure Arc, great solution, basically if you want to get the overview. Now, how can a server administrator or a application administrator, which just manages a specific set of servers, take advantage of that? And for that, I'm going to show you how that looks like. So I'm now a server administrator. I only should have specific access to specific servers which are running on-prem. And so I'm going to quickly go into that. Here I'm back in the Azure portal. So what I want to show you here is now I go to Azure Arc. So if I go to like in the port to Azure Arc, and you can see here, I can see organize and govern all your servers. You can see here manage your Kubernetes clusters, apps, and then also run data services anywhere. But for us, we really want to care about the server management piece right now. So what I can now see here is I can see now all the Azure Arc machines which I joined to Azure, which I, with my user account, have access to. So let's have a look at server 2 here. Server 2, again, is a server running not inside Azure, but you can see it looks like an Azure resource. So I get activity log, access control, I even get tagging. I can now tag my server here. And let's add a tag. Let's add the location tag I prepared. And since this one is running in my Surface Book here, or my Surface Pro, I'm going to add Surface Pro, I'm going to save that, and basically tag the location for that specific server. And so I know where it is and where it's hosted. Again, usually that's probably a data center and not my Surface Pro. So I also showed you already policies, but now I can also go into the policies which only specific for that server. So all the policies assignments for that server I can see here. I can see here a couple of them compliant, but with one I'm not compliant. So if I look at this is the one I showed you before, which basically audits VMs with insecure password settings. And then I can see, hey, there are different policies out there in this initiative. And then you can see that some of them are not compliant, some of them I am. Now let's have a look at one which I'm not compliant and see if I can fix this. And if I click on it, you can see here audit results from VMs that allow the reuse of the previous 24 passwords. So I know there's something wrong, and I could go now out and find a little bit more information about this and what that actually means, and I can basically go out and make sure my server is compliant as well. So the next thing I quickly want to show you is also we have also logs. We not just have policies, we also can connect that to Azure Log Analytics. And the problem with Azure Log Analytics was really that if you connected your servers to Azure Log Analytics, you needed to give access to the whole Log Analytics workspace. In this case, really, we basically give you a role-based access to just the specific logs of server 2 in this case. So I can run here a query which just addresses server 2. And you can see here if I run update, I can see all the updates which are needed or installed on that specific system. And I can have all the updates listed here. So again, there is where the whole role-based access control comes in as well. Now the question really comes, how do I actually add a server to Azure Arc? So adding a server is pretty simple. I click on the add button. And then it gives me two options. So one is the interactive script one. That's the one we're going to use, which basically allows me to join a server running a script. But then I don't always want to enter a password, like if I have hundreds of machines which I want to onboard. And for that, I could just use a service principal. So if I want to onboard machines at scale, I can use that. But for now, let's just go and onboard a single server. So I click on this. Again, because like every Azure resource, we need to add it to a subscription. And we need to add to resource group and also to a region. Right now, we're in public preview, so we have 3 visible regions here. I'm going to join mine to West Europe, and then I select which operating system I want to add. So is it a Windows machine or a Linux machine? In my case, it's a Windows one. I can then go out and basically set the proxy. So if there is, like your VM is behind the proxy, you can also configure that in the script. You can also already preset tags. So the thing I did, I can also tag the resources later, but I can also already do that right now. I'm not going to do that. And then if I'm done, I can basically download the script, which I then can just run, or I can have a look at it here. And basically what it does, it just downloads the agent, installs the agent, and then basically goes out and registers that with my Azure Arc. Now, if you run Windows Admin Center, again, things get even easier, right? So if I would go to Windows Admin Center, I connect to my server 2 here. So what I can do right now, I can go to settings of that server and you can see here I can do a couple of different things, but I can actually configure Azure Arc for servers directly within Windows Admin Center. So I go and click Get Started. I would also basically need to select, obviously, the subscription. It's kind of like the same wizard option I showed you before. So I'm going to select the subscription. I'm going to select the resource group. I can then select the Azure region. And if I needed to, I can basically go out and configure the proxy. And I just click on Setup, and this will download the agent, install the agent, and then connect my server to the right Azure subscription, to the right Azure tenant, with the right Azure resource group. After a while, it will then show up and say, hey, everything is done. Your server is connected. You get some more information, but you can also go out back to the Azure portal. And so if I would do a refresh, server 2 would show up here, and you can see here I can start using that server. It's also super easy. That's something you can set up today. Azure Arc for servers is in public preview, so you can go out and play around with it. It's basically just installing an agent on your machine. Again, if you want to then remove it and stop using Azure Arc, you can basically just go and uninstall that agent if you want to, and basically disconnect it again from that environment. So I got a question from Fabian here. How will this work together with on-prem legacy domains? So Azure Arc is fully domain agnostic, right? So it doesn't really matter if your servers are joined to a domain. You can use Azure Arc and Azure Guest Configuration Policies basically to manage those settings. Again, obviously, it's not probably ideal when you have overlapping, like with group policies, that I would not really take advantage of. But again, if you already have configured your domain the way you want it, that's absolutely fine. You can just go out and just audit your machines and say, hey, I just want to have, like, is this really set the right way? And it would basically show up. Or you could basically go out and say, hey, okay, I don't want to use group policy anymore. I just want to use the Azure Guest Configuration Policies and basically have a look at that. Again, keep in mind we're currently in public preview, so it's not really meant for production environments. But again, in long term, or well, very short or mid-term, as soon as this service comes probably out of public preview, then it's a different discussion, right? But again, it really depends, right, what your setup is. But you could basically go out, and what usually I say, Azure Guest Configuration is like group policies on steroids, right? So it's a very good and powerful solutions because, again, there is no necessary step. Your servers don't need to be joined to a domain. They can be, but they don't need to be joined to a domain. I hope that answers your question. So, having a quick look how Azure Arc works, I showed you that a little bit of architecture before. I just want to quickly show that with you too. Again, what I want to, if you look at the left side, if you have VMs in Azure, you're probably familiar with the guest agent, right? Every VM you deploy in Azure basically has that guest agent, and that allows the communication between Azure Resource Manager and that Azure VM. And then we have extensions basically which are working together with that guest agent. Now, on your service running outside of Azure, you don't have the Azure guest agent, right? And that's where the Azure Connected Machine agent comes into play, which then basically connects through Azure Arc to the Azure Resource Manager, and then you can take advantage of these VM extensions as well. So I talked a little bit about Azure Arc, and again, I'm just on a very high level here and only this very specific part. There is much more we can do. Again, running Azure Data Services anywhere, so you can basically go out and run Azure SQL in your data center if you want to. You extend your Azure Management capabilities across your environment. Doesn't matter if on-prem or other cloud providers. And that obviously then allows you also to adopt like practices you have from the cloud to your on-prem resources as well. And then with that, we also get obviously the power of like the Azure Security Suite basically anywhere. And again, there's much more. Didn't really have time in that live stream to basically talk about it. But again, go just to Azure Arc, find Azure Arc on the Azure website, and then basically get that information. And I'll probably put the links down in the description here. So going back to the Tailwind Traders story, again, Tailwind Traders had a look how they can make their on-prem environment even better using Azure Hybrid Services. And again, as I said before, I only really had time to a very small set. Again, we didn't really talk about the Azure Stack portfolio where we have solutions like Azure Stack Edge, Azure Stack Hub, and Azure Stack HCI, where you can basically get infrastructure into your data center as well, or at your locations as well. And then obviously our IoT suite, which is also very powerful if you're dealing with IoT devices. So in this session, you really learned about the different approaches about Azure Hybrid Services. You learned about Azure Site Recovery and how you can improve your DR strategy using Azure Site Recovery. You learned about Azure Update Management, and that helps you how to basically update your service across your hybrid environment. You learned about Azure File Sync and how you can actually replicate different file servers from different locations. And then you learned about how to use Azure Arc for servers to govern your service in a hybrid environment. And again, when I talk hybrid, this is always means now that it's in Azure, but it's on-prem, at the edge, but also in other cloud providers. So basically, it doesn't really matter where your servers are running. You can manage them with our Azure management tools. So if you want to learn more, I've put together a couple of links here. So one of them is about Windows Admin Center solutions for hybrid. So this brings you to the documentation page, how you can configure all these Azure Hybrid services. Again, super easy to do. You can also do them without Windows Admin Center, so you can onboard them directly. But again, Windows Admin Center makes it super easy. And even if you don't use Azure or these Windows Admin hybrid services, have a look at Windows Admin Center. It even helps you to manage your on-prem servers even better. And then Azure Arc. I also have a link to documentation of Azure Arc for servers and how you basically can onboard that. Keep in mind that's currently in public preview. And then if you want to learn more, and I think this is very important, I will keep that on the stream for a while, because this is really, if you haven't heard or haven't tried Microsoft Learn yet, I really recommend that you go out and try Microsoft Learn. It's not just about Azure, it also has for Microsoft learning modules for Microsoft 365, Dynamics, and much more. And all of them are free, so you can basically go out, you have different learning paths, different modules depending on your job role, but you can basically pick everything. You then have text, videos, some questions around it which you need to answer. But in some of them, you even get a sandbox environment, right? So if you're getting started with Azure, you don't want to spend any money, you don't want to create an Azure subscription to try out services. Basically, with Microsoft Learn, you get a sandbox environment where you can play around with Azure without having an Azure subscription, right? So this is really, really great start if you want to learn, if you want to prepare for certification. I highly recommend that. If we look out for the resources of this session, you can find them here with the following links. This will bring you basically to a GitHub repository where you get some like recordings of this session with some PowerPoint slides and decks and like recordings of the demos and like some information how to set these demos up. So if you also want to deliver them, feel free to go out. And again, if you're looking at Get Certified, I would recommend that you look at Azure Fundamentals, for example, if you're just getting started with Azure, because that gives you an idea how to set up Azure, how to configure it, and so on. And then also look at the new Azure Administrator certification, which basically goes about how to manage services in Azure, like for example, virtual machines, networking, storage, and all that stuff. Little pro tip, if you're looking at the Azure Fundamentals exam, look at the Azure Fundamentals learning path on Microsoft Learn. I believe it's a very good resource to basically go and prepare for that exam. I think like if you go seriously through that Microsoft learning path and through the modules, you should be very well prepared for the Azure Fundamentals exam. Okay, with that, I want to say thank you for everyone who joins the stream, for everyone who watches that recording. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Again, with that, I want to say thank you. And hopefully see you in the next stream. I'm going to be online tomorrow again, where we'll talk about how to get started with Azure governance. So thank you very much.